No carbon tax will ever satisfy global warming advocates, but by most measures, Canada's carbon tax is already too high. This unfortunate reality was brought to light by ResourceWorks, a British Columbia-based non-profit research and advocacy organization. In March, one of their papers outlined the disproportionate and damaging effects of Canada's carbon taxes. The study found that the average carbon tax among the top 20 oil-exporting nations, excluding Canada, was 70 cents per ton of carbon emissions in fiscal 2023. With Canada included, that average jumps to 6.77 per ton. At least Canada demands the same standards for foreign producers as it does for domestic ones, right? Wrong. Most of Canada's oil imports come from the US, Saudi Arabia, and Nigeria, none of which impose a carbon tax. Only 2.8% of Canada's oil imports come from the modestly carbon taxing countries of the UK and Colombia. Canada's federal consumer carbon tax was $80 per ton, set to reach $170 by 2030, until Prime Minister Mark Carney reduced it to zero on March 14. However, parallel carbon taxes on industry remain in place and continue to rise. ResourceWorks estimates Canada's effective carbon tax at $58.94 per ton for fiscal 2023, while foreign oil entering Canada had an effective tax of just 30 cents per ton. The research memo notes, this results in a 196-fold disparity, effectively functioning as a domestic tariff against Canadian oil production. Forget Donald Trump. Ottawa undermines our country more effectively than anyone else. Canada is responsible for 1.5% of global CO2 emissions, but the study estimates that Canada paid one-third of all carbon taxes in 2023. Mexico, with nearly the same emissions, paid just $3 billion in carbon taxes for 2023-24, far less than Canada's $44 billion. ResourceWorks also calculated that Canada alone raised the global per ton carbon tax average from $1.63 to $2.44. To be Canadian is to be heavily taxed. Historically, the Canadian dollar and oil and gas investment in Canada tracked the global price of oil, but not anymore. A disconnect began in 2016 when the Trudeau government cancelled the Northern Gateway pipeline and banned tanker traffic on British Columbia's north coast. The carbon tax was introduced in 2019 at $15 per ton, a rate that increased annually until this year. The study argues this economic burden, not shared by the rest of the world, has placed Canada at a competitive disadvantage by accelerating capital flight and reinforcing economic headwinds. This erosion of energy sector investment has broader economic consequences, including trade balance pressures and increased exchange rate volatility. According to NASA, Canadian forest fires released 640 million metric tons of carbon in 2023, 4 times the amount from fossil fuel emissions. We should focus on fighting fires, not penalizing our fossil fuel industry. Carney praised Canada's carbon tax approach in his 2021 book Values, raising questions about how long his reprieve will last. He has suggested raising carbon taxes on industry, which would worsen Canada's competitive disadvantage. In contrast, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre argued that extracting and exporting Canadian oil and gas could displace higher carbon-emitting energy sources elsewhere, helping to reduce global emissions. This approach makes more sense than imposing disproportionately high tax burdens on Canadians. Taxes won't save the world,